Leviticus chapter 15. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, To any and every man, when any man has a seminal discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean. This shall be the law of his uncleanness, whether his bodily member flows with an involuntary discharge of semen or is stopped up by his discharge. It is his uncleanness. Every bed on which he who has the discharge lies is unclean, and everything on which he sits shall be unclean. Whoever touches his bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Whoever sits on anything on which he who has the discharge sat shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Whoever touches the skin of him who has the discharge shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. If he who has the discharge spits on him who is clean, he shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Any saddle of a donkey on which he who has the discharge rides shall be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything under him shall be unclean until evening. And whoever carries any of those things shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Whomever he who has the discharge touches and has not rinsed his hands in water, he shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. An earthen vessel that he who has the discharge touches shall be broken, and every wooden vessel shall be rinsed in water. Now, when he who has a discharge is cleansed of his discharge, he shall count for himself 7 days for his cleansing. He shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. Then he shall be clean. On the 8th day he shall take for himself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons and bring these before the Lord to the door of the tabernacle of testimony and give them to the priest. Then the priest shall offer them, the one as a sin offering and the other as a whole burnt offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him before the Lord because of his discharge. If any man has an emission of semen, he shall wash all his body in water and be unclean until evening. Any garment and any leather on which there is semen shall be washed with water and be unclean until evening. Also, when a woman lies with a man and there is an emission of semen, they shall bathe in water and be unclean until evening. If a woman has a discharge, and the discharge from her body is blood, she shall be in her menstrual period 7 days, and whoever touches her shall be unclean until evening. Everything she lies on during her menstruation shall be unclean. Also everything she sits on shall be unclean. Whoever touches her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water and be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything she sat on shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. If anything is on her bed or on anything on which she sits, when he touches it, he shall be unclean until evening. If any man lies with her and her uncleanness is on him, he shall be unclean 7 days, and every bed on which he lies shall be unclean. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, other than at the time of her menstruation, or if it runs beyond this time, all the days of her unclean discharge shall be as the days of her menstruation. She shall be unclean. Every bed on which she lies all the days of her discharge shall be to her as the bed of her menstruation, and whatever she sits on, it shall be unclean, as the uncleanness of her menstruation. Whoever touches her shall be unclean, and he shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. But if she is cleansed of her discharge, she shall count for herself 7 days, and after that she shall be clean. Then on the 8th day she shall take for herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and bring them to the priest to the door of the tabernacle of testimony. The priest shall offer one as a sin offering and the other as a whole burnt offering, and the priest shall make atonement for her before the Lord because of the discharge of her uncleanness. Thus you shall make the children of Israel ungodly because of their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness when they defile my tabernacle among them. This is the law for one who has a discharge and who emits semen and is unclean thereby, and for her who is indisposed because of her menstrual period, and for one who has a discharge, either man or woman, and for the man who lies with her during her menstrual period.